Now to the new developments in one of the federal indictments against Donald Trump. Yesterday, we told you about a previously unseen memo that outlines the plot to overturn the 2020 election results by Donald Trump and members of his inner circle. The memo, which was obtained by the New York Times and has not been verified by NBC News, was allegedly sent in early December 2020 by Trump lawyer Kenneth Chesebro, who is one of the co-conspirators identified but not charged in the Justice Department's latest indictment of the former president. In the note, Chesebro details the so-called fake electors scheme, which falsely claimed former Vice President Mike Pence had the power to block the certification of the state's votes on January 6th, all just to buy time. Chesebro admitted that the Supreme Court would likely reject the plan. In a statement to NBC News, Chesebro's lawyers write that he was simply providing legal advice to Trump's campaign, but that, quote, whether the campaign relied upon that advice as he intended will have to remain a question to be resolved in court. Those efforts by Donald Trump and his lawyers to subvert democracy has, in no small part, led the American Bar Association to create a task force for American democracy. It will focus on three things: depoliticizing how elections are administered, educating the public on the principles of our democracy, and advancing improvements in election systems in order to root out distrust sowed by certain political leaders. And joining us now, the co-chairs of this newly formed task force, former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, Jeh Johnson. He's a partner at the law firm Paul Weiss, and retired Judge J. Michael Luttig, who served on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit.
So, Judge, let me begin with you. First of all, I just got to say thank you for your strong, uncompromising voice on protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States. I heard a friend of mine actually on TV a couple of days ago going, oh, well, I like the new Judge Luttig. And my response was, no, it's the same judge who's always respected and defended the Constitution of the United States. Talk about this task force and also the threat from our party, my former party. I would guess your former party. Talk about the threat to democracy that's before us now because of the undermining of the rule of law.
Mika and Joe, thank you so much for inviting Secretary Johnson and me to join you this morning to introduce the country to the American Bar Association's new task force. American democracy is in crisis today. It is the most important issue facing the nation between now and 2025 and even beyond. The continuing false claims to this day that the 2020 presidential election was stolen from the former president and the Republicans. Those claims have laid waste to Americans' confidence in their elections and also to their faith in American democracy. ABA President Mary Smith, in announcing this blue ribbon task force of the nation's 1.5 million lawyers, said that we lawyers must run to the storm. All Americans must run to the storm, Joe. That is the crisis of American democracy today.
So, Jeh Johnson, on that note, how does the task force plan to do that, to run to the storm? What actions and what policies will you be pushing to try and reach the goal of the 3 points laid out as we introduce this task force, including educating the public?
So first, thank you for having us on. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair with Judge Luttig, who was one of the heroes of January 6th, in my opinion, serving with him on this task force to strengthen our democracy, to recommend how we strengthen our democracy, will be the capstone of my public service career. Everything is going to be on the table, in my opinion, from not only looking at how we educate young people, American civics, but also how our cybersecurity, social media, conventional media contribute to or detract from our democracy, to the very manner in which we elect candidates for federal office in our country. And we put together a really extraordinary, distinguished, nonpartisan, bipartisan group of Americans to look at this with us. Retired former judges like Judge Luttig, including the former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, two former candidates for president, Carly Fiorina and Dick Gephardt, historians, scholars, people like Bill Kristol, Sherrilyn Ifill, the former head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And we're going to take the next year to go on basically a listening tour around the country. We're going to do our own research, develop some recommendations that we will deliver a year from now that I hope and believe will be implementable and will gain support among the American people. This group is, by the way, not just limited to lawyers. Lawyers don't have a corner and a monopoly on wisdom. And so we've got a number of just basic patriotic Americans who want to help us out.
Jay, this is Claire. Good morning, and good morning to you, Judge. I'm hopeful that in this process there will be some effort to look at the lawyers who have violated their oaths to the law and to the Constitution by embracing the big lie and the fraud. I know there have been some lawyers who have had disciplinary hearings, a few that have been disbarred in a few jurisdictions. But do you all plan on looking on how well are lawyers policing themselves as it relates to supporting our democracy? This seems like kind of an empty exercise to me if we can't keep our own house clean as lawyers.
Senator, the lawyers of the nation are uniquely qualified and positioned to protect and preserve American democracy and the rule of law. And this task force, first and foremost, will be looking into the issues surrounding our Constitution and the rule of law that have come out of the attack and assault on American democracy and her institutions of democracy and law over the past 2 or 3 years. The task force is not likely to speak directly to the counsel that was provided to the former president in the lead up to January 6th. But certainly at 40,000 foot level, the task force will address the profound obligations of lawyers under the Constitution and the rule of law.
I have a question for Secretary Johnson. I'm not a lawyer. I am married to one. I would never say that lawyers are not important because of that. However, in this case, our government was built on a system of checks and balances. And one of the things that I think people who are concerned about democracy and its future point to as a failure was the inability of our political system to hold those checks and balances or barely hold them together. By that, I look at the second impeachment and the idea that was, well, he's out of office soon, we can let the courts decide this. In fact, it was a political issue, the second impeachment, and it was kind of punted down the road. So my question to you guys is, part of this task force, how directly will you work with elected officials? Obviously, there's a legal component, but how directly will you work with elected officials to sort of persuade them, as the judge did in the lead up to January 6th, of the critical nature of democracy and its fragility, too?
So that's a good question. We do expect to engage, first of all, state secretaries of state who are responsible for running elections in their respective jurisdictions. One of the missions of this task force, in my view, needs to be looking at what incentivizes political actors to engage in extremist rhetoric, extremist behavior? What incentivizes them when you have over something like 400 safe seats in the House of Representatives to basically play to their extremes in their respective constituencies? Joe knows this better than I do. And when it comes to the issue of lawyers, Claire, this is what happens when a president systematically drives out of his administration anybody interested in maintaining the guardrails and has left nothing but people who are just simply yes men in his administration. I learned when I was a senior legal official at the Department of Defense, you cannot give your clients simply legal advice that they want to hear. You have to give them the best and most sustainable legal opinion about what the law calls for, authorizes, and prohibits.
Former Secretary of Homeland Security Jeh Johnson and retired federal judge J. Michael Luttig, thank you both very much for being on the show this morning.
And thank you for your service to this country. We greatly appreciate it.